On the evening of July 30th, 2008, a 22-year-old man called Tim McLean boarded a Greyhound bus. He had taken up employment as a carnival employee in 2008 and was returning home to Winnipeg. He had boarded the bus earlier in the day and sat in the rear, one row ahead of the restroom. At 6:55 p.m, the bus departed from a stop in Erickson with a new passenger, 40-year-old Vince Lee. Lee had immigrated to Winnipeg from China in 2001 and had become a Canadian citizen in late 2006. He had studied computer science at the Wuhan Institute of Technology, and before migrating, he worked as a computer software engineer for 4 years. However, he was unable to find steady work in Canada, moving from jobs at McDonald's to Meatland Food to Walmart, where he eventually was fired over a disagreement with a co-worker. Lee originally sat near the front of the bus, but moved next to McLean following a scheduled rest stop. McLean barely acknowledged Lee and proceeded to fall asleep with his head against the window and headphones in. He was unaware that the stranger next to him was not a well man. Before Vince Lee had boarded the bus that fateful evening, he was already showing signs of someone on the brink of a mental episode. He was observed sitting at the bus stop long before his ride was scheduled to arrive. Emotionless and quiet, he posted a sign reading "laptop for sale" in front of his luggage and sat there through the entire night. According to one witness, he was seen at 3 a.m. sitting bolt upright with his eyes wide open. The next morning, just hours before he would board the bus with Tim McLean, he sold his new laptop to a 15-year-old boy for just $60. There were dozens of witnesses that evening when Lee changed his seat and positioned himself next to the sleeping McLean. Just moments after the bus began moving, Lee calmly pulled out a massive hunting knife and began stabbing McLean in the neck and chest. Instantly waking up, McLean began to scream in pain. He attempted to desperately fight Lee off for a few moments, but he was no match for the killer, who calmly continued the attack on McLean. As Lee impaled McLean over and over, he was calm and methodical, never changing his expression or showing emotion. Witnesses were shocked by the lack of rage and the way he committed the killing. After the attack began, the bus driver pulled urgently to the side of the road, and he and all the other passengers fled the vehicle. The driver and 2 other men carefully boarded the bus again to see if they could help McLean. However, Lee chased them away with the knife, forcing them to exit the bus and locked the doors from the outside. Lee cut off McLean's head and displayed it to those standing outside the bus, and began dismembering other parts as well as consuming some of McLean's flesh. At 8:30 p.m, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police received a reporting of a stabbing on a Greyhound bus. They arrived to find Lee still on board the bus, being prevented from escaping by a group of men who guarded the door with a crowbar and hammers. The other passengers were huddled at the roadside, some of them crying and vomiting. The driver had engaged the emergency immobilizer system, so Lee could not attempt to drive the bus away. During this time, witnesses had observed Lee stabbing and cutting McLean's body with a knife, as well as carrying McLean's severed head around with him. By 9 p.m, police were in a standoff with Lee and had summoned special negotiators and a heavily armed tactical unit. Officers then observed Lee eating parts of the body and heard him say that he would stay on the bus forever. Several hours later, at 1:30 a.m. the next morning, Lee attempted to escape by breaking through a back window of the bus. He was tasered twice and handcuffed before being placed in the back of a police cruiser. While searching Lee for any hidden weapons, police found McLean's ears, nose and tongue in his pockets. Most of the other parts of McLean's body were retrieved from the bus in plastic bags. The victim's eyes and a part of his heart were never recovered and are presumed to have been eaten by Lee during the police standoff. Lee's trial commenced on March 3, 2009. At his first appearance in a courthouse on charges of second-degree murder, the only words he reportedly uttered were pleas for someone to kill him. He later pleaded not criminally responsible on the account of mental disorder. This is only reached when a judge or jury finds that the accused was suffering from a mental disorder while committing the criminal act, and as a result is exempt from criminal responsibility. Although Lee was obviously responsible for his actions that evening, Canadian law has surprisingly relaxed requirements for those with mental illness. Lee refused to hire a lawyer, and those who represented him stated he could not be accountable for what he did due to his untreated schizophrenia. This is a mental health condition where you may see, hear or believe things that are not real. The psychiatrist said that Lee performed the attack because God's voice had told him McLean was a force of evil and was about to execute him. Lee had also previously harbored deeply disturbing thoughts about aliens and how he had been chosen by God to vanquish them. The judge accepted the diagnosis and ruled that Lee was not criminally responsible for the killing. As a result, Lee was committed to a high-security psychiatric ward for 1 year so he could be evaluated and treated according to his condition. The horror of the situation took its toll on everyone involved. Many of the passengers from that night suffered from recurring nightmares and feelings of severe anxiety. Some tried to drink the memories away, while others sought therapy and even moved to new locations. On July 17, 2014, one of the first officers at the scene, Corporal Ken Barker, committed suicide due to his PTSD relating to the killing. Although he had been exposed to many gruesome and frightening scenes over the years, he could not seem to shake those bloody images of McLean's corpse from his mind. The family of Tim McLean brought a lawsuit of $150,000 against Greyhound, the Attorney General of Canada, and Lee. Following McLean's death was the birth of his son nearly 5 months later in December 2008. McLean's son, now 12 years old, must also come to terms with his father's death. While the McLeans struggled with the loss of Tim, Lee was kept in a high-security psychiatric ward. On May 30th, 2011, it was reported that Lee was responding well to his psychiatric treatment and that his doctor had recommended that he received more freedoms, phased in over several months. On May 17, 2012, Lee had been granted temporarily passes that would allow him out of the mental health center for visits to the local town, where he was supervised by a nurse and a peace officer. In an interview, Lee spoke for the first time, saying he had been hearing the voice of God and that he wanted to save people from an alien attack. On March 6, 2014, Lee was allowed to have unsupervised visits to the local town, starting at 30 minutes and expanding to full-day trips. Less than a year later, Lee was given unsupervised day passes to visit Winnipeg, so long as he carried a functioning cell phone. On May 8, 2015, Lee was granted passes to home groups in the community. In February 2016, it was reported that Lee had legally changed his name to Will Baker and had won the right to leave his group home to live independently. On February 10, 2017, Lee was granted an absolute discharge and full freedom. There are no legal obligations or restrictions on his ability to live an independent life. Although McLean's parents have said they have no words for the grave injustice of the decision, Lee is a free man and has been living on his own in a Winnipeg apartment ever since. While he continues to live peacefully, for those who were affected by the horrific killing of Tim McLean, there can be no peace.